understand about how the glycemic index is measured. And then I'd like to just briefly talk about how the glycemic index can be leveraged to short circuit some of the neural circuits that would otherwise lead us to crave and perhaps even ingest sugary foods. First of all, measurements of glycemic indices of food are typically made by having people ingest those foods in isolation. And in general, we can say that anytime we ingest fiber and or fat, lipids, along with a particular food, it will reduce the glycemic index of that particular food, either the absolute level of blood glucose that a particular food causes or the rate at which that elevation in blood glucose occurs. Okay? And this is why there are some seemingly paradoxical aspects to sweet stuff in terms of the glycemic index. For instance, ice cream has a lower glycemic index provided it's ice cream that includes fat, which I hope it would because that's the good tasting ice cream in my opinion, compared to something like mangoes or table sugar. The glycemic index is not something to hold holy in most cases because most people are not ingesting foods in isolation. Now, why am I telling you about the glycemic index? Well, if we zoom out and take our perspective on all of this discussion about the glycemic index through the lens of the nervous system, and we remind ourselves that neurons prefer glucose for energy and that all sweet things or things that we perceive as sweet, but also sweet things that are ingested and registered by those neuropod cells in our gut, trigger the release of dopamine and trigger these neural circuits to make us want to eat more of these foods. What we start to realize is that a sharp rise in blood glucose or a very high degree of elevation in blood glucose is going to be a much more potent signal than will a more moderate rise in blood glucose or a slower rise in blood glucose. And so for those of you that are trying to reduce sugar intake and you want to do that through an understanding of how these neural circuits work, and you want to short circuit some of the dopamine release that's caused by ingesting sugary foods, it can be advantageous to ingest sweet foods in combination with foods that reduce glycemic index or reduce glycemic load. So that might mean making different food choices. So paying attention to sweet tasting foods that can satisfy sugar cravings but do not have as steep, or I should say do not cause as steep a rise in blood sugar. Or it could mean consuming other foods along with sweet foods in order to reduce the glycemic index and thereby slow or blunt the release of dopamine. So if you really wanted to adjust your sugar cravings and you really still want to ingest some sugary foods, you